Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. With the voice, Milt Thompson. Delivering the best of sports programming. Interviews with top celebrities. And the answer to the question, where are they now? And now, Milt Thompson, Playing for Keeps.
Good evening and welcome to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, The Voice, Milt Thompson, right here on WHMB Channel 40 every Friday night at 9 p.m. Tune in because you know what? We have a lead up into Phil Arzenberger's show when he's talking about basketball, and then it goes into the game of the week. It's either basketball and basketball season or football and football season. So we are your place for sports on Fridays. You want to be here and also take advantage of the opportunities that are given to you by our wonderful sponsors. You want to go to Jiffy Lube. We're going to be talking about cars here today a little bit. And when you talk about cars, you got to talk about make sure they're oiled up and ready to go and cleaned up and ready to go. And that you can't get better services than you can get there with our Steve Sander and our good friends out there at Jiffy Lube and law firm of Bleaky Dillon Crandall. They make sure that you get some of your legal needs handled. So I know you'll patronize them as well. And you want to go to East Spot Spas, right? We go over there, we get all of our muscles and all of our soft tissue injuries. Isn't that right, Kelly? We get taken care of out there, and they'll do a cold laser treatment on you and make sure, Big Steve Downing says, I got to go over there. I said, man, because of my knees. I said, man, you're too tall. You don't have any knees. What about people like us? We really got some thick things going on here where we get muscle and aches. So we're going to go to East Spot Spas and make sure we take advantage of that. And you know, we have the absolute best in sports programming, not only in central Indiana, but around the state and around the country and around the entire globe when it comes down to it. So we're going to be talking some global sports today. We're going to talk about one of the biggest sports ever. Even before Indiana and Indianapolis was dubbed as a amateur sports capital, we had a monster of an event. Had a monster of an event that now has a spawning other events that go around it. And everybody knows about Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Had a recent change of ownership, but that doesn't change the direction that they're going, and that is up other than just around. And we're going to do that with our special guest tonight, the great ameliorator. The great ameliorator, some people know him as Tic Tac, but we're going to call him Jimmy McMillan, and we'll be right back after these words, and we'll talk with him then.
Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube.
Welcome back to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, The Voice, Milt Thompson, here on WHMB's Channel 40. And we come here every Friday night, and we bring you the best in sports programming. The last few weeks, we've had the fireballer Drew Storen, and we've had, oh my goodness, Dr. Dunk, Mr. Slam. We've had Darnell Hillman just recently. Oh my goodness, all the wonderful talent and folks where they are, where are they now, and where are we today? We're here with the great, the ameliorator, Jimmy Tic Tac McMillan. Welcome to our show, man.
Thank you, Milt. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, we had a little bit of a preview with you during the Indiana Black Expo. We got you a few snippets then, and I think there's still piecing that show together, but it said, no, your information is too valuable to only have in a snippet. We want you for the whole enchilada, and that's what we got you for today. So, Jimmy, having you on our show is a treat for me because I've had a wonderful front row seat in watching you grow from a wonderful lawyer, but into a great ameliorator, putting people together from different walks of life and making it happen for so many people. Tell me about your position that you're in now.
Well, today I'm the Chief Diversity Officer and Senior Corporate Counsel for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So the common joke is, they say a black man has to work twice as hard as a white man. Somehow I got twice the jobs from Roger. So I'm living that every day, but it's been wonderful. I've been there since May 2nd, 2016, and I haven't had a bad second at work since then. I'm living the dream. I have probably the best legal job in all of Indiana. And
next to mine, of course.
Well,
I get to talk to people like that, have the next best legal jobs.
I think you have certainly been a mentor of mine. And I remember when we worked at the firm together and watching you and knowing your career and saying, how did this guy get to do all these fun things and great things, never knowing that one day I'd grow up and then I'd be in the same circumstance. So I want to thank you for all the things that you've laid for people like me and the foundation that you've laid. I certainly stand on your shoulders.
You know how to do it on your own, my brother. I'm glad I was around to watch it. So Jimmy McMillan is doing Chief Executive Officer of Equity and Inclusion at the Motor Speedway. And I just recently learned that was kind of a cottage industry. And before I knew it, people have been having this discipline for more than 20 years. And I'm saying they actually have professionals that do that. I thought we just got together and say, hey, we need some help to get people more diverse around this institution or organization. But there literally is some science to it. There's an academic background for it. Tell me what you know about that.
Well, unfortunately, after the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd and the murder of Breonna Taylor, and some of the things that you saw that happened in the NBA, some of the things that happened in the NFL, globally, not only in sports, but also in corporations, I think businesses, hopefully, have started to get serious and started to hire chief diversity officers and activate programs in diversity, equity, inclusion, because they realize, hopefully, the value that comes with having a diverse workforce and making sure that your employees feel included, feel accepted, are promoted, investing in communities and making sure you're creating pipelines for your workforce and in our case, also developing a more broader fan base and making sure that we're reaching out to people who actually have money, want to spend, want to invest. You see the NFL is diverse and the success it has. The NBA is diverse, the success it has. There's no reason that motorsports can't be equally diverse and also share in that success financially.
Tell me about your legal career prior to getting to the Speedway.
Went to law school at the IU McKinney School of Law and then went on to work for a gentleman you know who's like a father to me, Justice Frank Sullivan, as his law clerk for the Indiana Supreme Court. And then went on to Barnes & Thornburg, where I became a partner. I was there for 12 years in the litigation department, really not doing anything in this area until late in my career when I decided I wanted to merge my passion for motorcycles and cars with my profession and work with a guy named Mark Owens to start our motorsports practice group. Didn't have any clients, but got some good advice back at the time to say, hey, just go to those events, step out at the events and start shaking hands, greeting people, meeting people, explaining to them you're a lawyer and you have interest. And that's how I really started developing clients in the space. I also, interestingly enough, pretty much knocked on the door of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and said, hey, I want to do a charity event for the Crystal Moore House, which is in Haughville, which is a neighboring academy. And people like Paul Riley and folks over Mel Harder and some folks over there were kind enough to let me use their little facility for what was supposed to be a 200, 300 bike event that turned out to be a whole lot larger. We had probably 5,000 to 6,000 African-American and Latino bikers showed up. And I think that really said to the Speedway, this guy must have something. And so that developed a relationship that has turned into me having the job that I have and being in the position that I have, both as a lawyer and a diversity officer.
Great ameliorator. We're talking about Jimmy McMillan. When you're ameliorating between other folks and things like that, how do you ameliorate a motorcycle group? Well, first of all, where does your passion come for fast stuff?
Yeah, I love everything fast except roller coasters. And for some reason, I get sick. I get sick riding roller coasters. But motorcycles, you know, I got a ZX 1400, does 186 miles an hour. I got a Camaro that does 170-something miles an hour. And I love fast things. You know, it's interesting that the narrative has been that African Americans and people of color are just not into racing. And I just think it's crazy. If you look at drag racing, some of the old school guys will tell you, you know, the drag race track and run what you brung has always been a part of.
Antron Brown, I mean, drag wins he's got a new racing team, by the way, and he's won a world championship in drag racing.
Yeah, I mean, it's about opportunity.
Right.
And it's about access. And if you look back into the Golden Glory sweepstakes, some of you may be familiar with that, which was an African-American racing series back in the 1920s, 1930s that raced at the state fairgrounds. You know, these opportunities have been denied to us or foreclosed to us for things beyond money. But now it's good to see those things now opening up when you see Michael Jordan's investment in NASCAR with Bubba Wallace's team and Denny Hamlin. But also, most importantly, how many people don't know about Lewis Hamilton? You know, here's a black brother from England who is the 7-time world champion of F1 and probably one of the most wealthy and highest paid athletes in the world, who drives for Mercedes and is absolute excellent at his craft. But that story and that narrative is not told. So to have that, be in the position to work with folks like Roger Penske and Rod Reed and some of the other people, Mark Miles, Doug Bowes, Allison Millington, to work with them to recast that narrative and say, hey, there are many people like me who love to go fast and who look like me, who want opportunities in the sport, and create those opportunities has just been a blessing.
Well, there's so many community development things that can happen because of the sport that people weren't aware of. I remember back early in the 90s. I did a little work with Jimmy Voiles and some other folks out there trying to convert the dirt track of old Busch Stadium. And the community was just like, well, why would we do anything on this side of 16th Street? Because you guys are down on the other side of 16th Street. What are you guys going to do for us? So you had to have a compelling message to say there is a lot of opportunity, not just driving, but in the entire motorsports industry. Tell us a little bit about how you're trying to blend those things, not only the drive, we'll get to the driving side in a little bit, but it's a bigger industry than that.
Absolutely. And first, when our program is called the Race for Equality and Change. And when we sat down with Roger and Mark to create this program, the first thing I talked about was our internal staff, the 250-something full-time employees that we have, facilities work, marketing, HR, IMSP, we have productions, video production work, legal, all of the things, engineering, tons of engineering opportunities. Those are the jobs that are present, and those are the, on race day, there's only 33 drivers in the Indy 500. And it would be great to have an African-American driver there. We certainly have had Hispanic drivers throughout the history of the sport. But Lewis Hamilton did a report, actually in F1, and he said, having an African-American driver and having an African-American champion has not diversified the sport. What you really have to focus on is around the edges and the other opportunities that exist. So all of those folks who are in Hallville should see it as, here's an opportunity for our children to come in and perhaps they have an interest in art. Well, if you've ever been to the Motor Speedway, each one of those cars and helmets is art. Perhaps one of my kids is interested in marketing or sales, learning how to sell a sponsorship and get somebody to pay $1 million or $2 million to put a logo on a car to go around in a circle or an oval is quite significant. We are trying to create opportunities for that. So we've done things like create the Diverse Leadership in Motorsports program cohort, where we bring in students of color for the summer, put them in different departments, expose them to our craft, but also we take them to Brother Brian Richardson at the Colts, and they spend a day with the Colts, and we take them to Trisha Ellis over at the Pacers, and they spend a day with the Pacers leadership, and they spend a day with the NCAA's leadership. So we're immersing them and teaching them how to not only be successful in motorsports, but sports in general, and the focus is not just on driving, it's on all the opportunities and all the careers that could happen in sports.
So you imagine the diversity of interests that are out there. And I want to kind of dig into, who do you think is your customer in your position? Is it young children? Is it communities? Is it your bosses? Is it the activity surrounding it? Is it the ancillary businesses and all those sort of things? We're going to want to dig into that in our next segment, though. But we've got the great ameliorator, and if anybody can bring things together, you know what amelioration means, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, when Kathy Jordan was on here, I called her indefatigable, and she said, you can't even spell that. I said, I don't have to spell it as long as I can say it. I know what amelioration means, and I know that no one does it better than our guest today, great ameliorator, Jimmy McMillan. And we're going to be right back here after these short words on Playing for Keeps. You come right back here.
Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube.
Welcome back to Playing for Keeps, and I am your host, the voice, Milt Thompson, right here on WHMB Channel 40. Playing for Keeps, I used to do a radio show called Playing for Keeps when I was on ESPN, and they said, we may still have a face for television. Nah, we're going to do, so I took my own name back, brought it over here to the television show, and we're using Playing for Keeps because we're talking to the people who play for keeps. It's for real. It's not a fantasy. The world of sports, you might love what's on the oval, you may love what's on the court, you may love what's between the lines, but if you don't love what's behind the scenes, you're missing out on the biggest stuff and pecuniary interest, economic value in the real world of sports. And how can people of diverse backgrounds, how can they be involved? We're talking with the great ameliorator, the one whose responsibility is to get those people interested, bring them along. He has an enormous need for speed and translated that from his law practice into one of automobiles. There was a ownership change out there not too long ago. Tell us about all of that. And you mentioned Mark Miles and Allison Langton and all the other folks that are out there in the top brass of the Motor Speedway. And it's always been a driver in our community. They sometimes said a cornfield with a racetrack in the middle. That's not the same. It's not that way anymore, is it?
No. But the Holman family previously owned the track, and a great World of debt of gratitude is owed to them for being the great stewards that they were for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for so many years. Tony George and his entire family. And they were gracious enough. I came in under their leadership and worked with them and many of their family members while they were there. In January of 2020, the captain, Roger Penske, owner of Penske Racing, Penske Trucking, Penske Automotive Group, 68,000 employees. He decides to buy his greatest passion and his greatest hobby, which is racing, being one of the winningest owners in all of motorsports. And then COVID hits, you spend that kind of money and then all of a sudden they tell you can't have any events and you don't know at the time if you'll ever be able to have events again. It's hard for people to realize as we sit here today what the mindset was at the time. And I can tell you grateful, thankful, appreciative every day as we were going through that he was the person who owned the track and that his leadership, his resources, his leverage, everything that he brought to the table helped steer us through that, both personally and professionally. And working with him every day, he is extremely engaged, especially on the topic of diversity. Everything he does, he sets a standard and he backs it and he does it in a way that no one else can. And so, when I was offered this opportunity to take on this role as Chief Diversity Officer, I was like, this is a once in a lifetime role. My position is different than Brian. My position is different than Tracy. I came into a situation where the sport was not viewed as diverse. People called it the big Ku Klux Klan meeting or white expo and all the negative stereotypes. But I came in as a person who loved the sport and had a passion for it that was brought on by the experiences I had with the Brickyard and some friends who had took me to the race. And so I knew that what we needed to do was expose people. We needed to get people in the track. This year we offered over 10,000, we invited over 10,000 diverse fans to the track who had never been here before. And you know what I learned? The big thing that happened with the track was, I don't know if it was strategic or not, but there was an assumption at some point in time that the track was full, 70s and 80s, you couldn't get in on practice day, that those fans would generate children and grandchildren that they would just bring to the track and they would always be about racing. We didn't bring schools to the track, by and large. Unlike, when you grew up and you went to the museum and you went to Bulls games when I was in Chicago, you didn't see that. And so I talked to folks, white, black, blue, and brown, and they say, did you come here as part of your school experience? They say no. And so it's interesting because Indianapolis switched from being a manufacturing town where you worked at the same place that your dad and granddad worked in to being a place where kids grow up, go to school, leave, and don't come back. And I think a lot of that fan base left, and there was no fan base to replace it. So this diversity effort, interestingly enough, you asked me who's my directed target. It's everybody, because now we're bringing schools in and they're black kids, they're brown kids, they're white kids. And those kids have never been to the track. And we are developing and planting the seeds for new fans. Fans starting at a young level who we hope will have memorable experiences and then come back year after year after year and regrow and redevelop that base that we haven't had in so long.
You have a passion for the game, for racing. How do we have other people translate that to them, to another generation? And that's a great ameliorator. Now, I had some experience early on being involved with racing. I represented a few racing teams and a couple race drivers. And what really occurred to me is that most folks don't have the kind of resources to be able to get involved at a driving level, even if it's a junior driving level or an ownership level. Because I was told then, it says, you know how you make $10 million in racing, right? Spend 20. Without the resources, there has to be a learning curve and something in between. So if someone says, is there a black IndyCar racer? They may think back and look at Willie Ribbs. Is that the only example that's out there? But there's so many other circuits in racing where it is you can cultivate. Tell me a little bit about that, Jimmy, and what you do on a regular basis to try to be able to feed the kitty.
Well, we've got to start with Rod Reed. For those of you who don't know, for over 17 years, he has had a program called NXG Youth Motorsports, located at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, that has provided inner city youth, black and brown children, primarily boys and girls, ages 11 to 16, the opportunity to race go-karts, to learn STEM concepts at the same time. So they do about an hour and a half of STEM, and then they race for about 3 hours. My own son participated in the program. He usually teaches about 200, 250 kids a year here in Indianapolis. Under Roger's leadership and the Race for Equality and Change, we were able to get sponsorship to expand that program to Detroit. So now we've got about 200 kids in Detroit. It's a great pipeline program for young kids who are interested in racing but may not have the resources, because for the most part, we provide everything for the program: carts, equipment, uniforms. NXG is its own foundation, but they provide everything for the parents and kids to be able to enjoy and learn about the sport, and it's a great entry point for the sport. Beyond that, you have Force Indy, which Roger paired with Rod as co-owners to create this team that had an African-American driver named Miles Rowe, an African-American crew led by engineers who were from that first class of NXG 17 years ago. And they came in, became the first African-American owner, first African-American driver to win an IndyCar sanctioned event at our level 1 USF 2000 in New Jersey back in 2021. This year, Miles competed under Pabst Racing and with the Force Indy, with the support of Roger Penske, and was able to come in second in the series of USF 2000, winning a series of races. So really showing his talent and displaying his skills as an African-American driver who had never raced a full series of anything prior to competing in USF 2000. Rod and Force Indy team went up to Indy Lights with Ernie Francis, who's another African-American driver who had success racing with Tony Stewart in his league, and now is going into his second season with Force Indy and in the Indy Lights program. And so we're expecting big things from him and the Force Indy team. But imagine that, being able to create and fund a team that supports and creates this pipeline of drivers of color to be able to have entry points into the sport. That's the significance of where we are today as opposed to where we were before.
Well, there's been some changes over history, right? Various partners out there, like I guess you guys are getting another engine manufacturer coming up. Opportunities for young people to learn and work through those big partners of yours. Education, engineering schools, Purdue and others that depend on a pipeline of folks in engineering. But how does that translate into your job in getting them interested in the industry of motorsports, necessarily just driving or owning a team?
Well, the IUPUI was gracious enough to create a pipeline, and that they said to NXG Youth Motorsports, any kid that completes your program and then enrolls into the IUPUI Motorsports program will get a scholarship. And it's a significant scholarship. That's when people talk about creating pipelines. When you look at our internship program and our cohort program, up in Purdue, we found that there was a Purdue go-karting team that was sponsored by the National Society of Black Engineers. We work with Firestone to develop funds to basically support another car for that team, in addition to having members of that team serve on our IndyCar technical team, which travels from race to race, helping to make sure that all of the car setup is correct and in accordance with our rules. And we had a young man who participated on that paid opportunity and paid team. Every tool in the toolbox is what I say. Every tool in the toolbox, getting the teams engaged. We're now starting to have teams who are coming to us and say, where's the talent? We need to get younger. And we don't care if the person is blue, black, green, or brown, but we need to make sure that we're still having people come into this sport with the technological ability to do it. And you got to name Max Siegel. People like
Certainly.
Working with people like Max, who has had a tremendous impact in NASCAR and the drive for diversity, but also in taking athletes who are football players and basketball players and converting them.
No one is better at doing this than the great ameliorator, and that's Jimmy McMillan. Thank you for being on our show. We'll be back here next Friday night on WHMB Channel 40.